Teddy Roosevelt once said, "A people without children would face a hopeless future. A country without forests is just as helpless." He recognized that forests are a basic life support system that has provided for humans since the beginning of time. Here in Wisconsin, the story was the same. Over a period of 100 years, we would test that idea, as the forests were removed for lumber and eventually renewed as a valuable asset. Wisconsin's woodland Indians depended on forests for the resources necessary for life. The great forests provided wild game, edible plants, sugar from the maple, and clean water filled with fish. A resourceful people, they used forest products for shelter, clothing, heat, tools, and transportation. As the first European settlers arrived, they too depended on the forest for similar subsistence needs. A crackling fire in the hearth of a log cabin kept many a settler warm on a cold winter night. But Europeans looked at the forest differently than their Native American neighbors. The forests and wild game of Europe had long since been harvested. The wealth and resources awaiting them in Wisconsin seemed endless. As the nation expanded westward, so too did our need for resources. By the time Wisconsin became a state in 1848, local lumbering was beginning to provide the building materials for houses, barns, and businesses throughout Wisconsin, Chicago, and the prairie states of the Midwest. As one author put it, the pioneer lumberman might easily have believed that Providence had created the Wisconsin pineries for his exploitation. They lay near the great and increasing market of the prairies and were drained by 6 river systems connecting them to the market. As the trees were converted to lumber, money was pumped in Wisconsin's economy. Mill towns sprang up along the waterways, providing necessities for a growing workforce. Places like Oshkosh, Ashland, Stevens Point, and Rhinelander were given nicknames like Sawdust City. Jobs were plentiful and just in time as thousands of new immigrants arrived each month. The process of getting saleable lumber out of Wisconsin's forest was not an easy task. Many individuals were needed to turn standing trees into marketable lumber. Where else could an immigrant earn 50 cents to $1 a day? By 1899, the demand for lumber continued as the nation's population continued to grow. Wisconsin's lumber camps and lumber mills were turning out the most lumber of any state in the Union. That number one status would last only 3 years. By then the great pineries of the north had been cut over and an equal amount had burned. The great forests of Wisconsin were gone. Left behind was a landscape that looked more like a moon than a forest. Lumber companies soon divested their land holdings. It didn't make sense to them to continue to pay taxes on land that would not produce lumber for another 100 years. The land sale boom began. Land speculation was big business in northern Wisconsin. Lumber companies, railroads, land companies, local newspapers, the state legislature, and even the University of Wisconsin courted settlers to come to the area. With no truth in advertising laws, the tactics used to attract prospective land buyers would be considered fraudulent today. Brochures were filled with enticing photographs and words like,
"These pictures show plainer than words what an honest man can do in a few years. There's neither cyclones nor blizzards in this part of the country, but a healthy climate, rich in productive soil where abundant crops could be raised without fear from drought or undesirable contingencies."
Thousands of immigrants left their homelands and staked their life savings on a dream of owning a productive farm. What many bought was a landscape covered with stumps and rocks. After the hard work of removing these obstacles, they soon found out the reality of what they had been promised. The northern region of Wisconsin did indeed have cyclones and blizzards. The climate was harsh, the growing season short, and drought a possibility. The soils were sandy and infertile. Life was hard, and many were isolated from the rest of the world.
3 of my 4 grandparents emigrated directly from Europe to the United States, eventually ending up in northern Wisconsin, Weyerhaeuser specifically. They found, I think, pretty much cut over land already, though there were some second growth forests. They began farming there, and they found it very difficult. The soil was terrible, really, full of rocks and not very rich. They generally pastured cattle, dairy cattle, and were able to get by. My mother's parents did quite well because they logged in the wintertime. My grandpa ran logging camps. He'd buy land, log it over, and then resell it.
Although some survived, many soon found their dreams a nightmare. Faced with financial ruin, many farm families abandoned their lands. Wisconsin became known as the land of 1,000 failures. By the early 1900s, the northern region of Wisconsin was cut over, burned over, and farming had collapsed. This deserted landscape brought the birth of forestry to Wisconsin. Abandoned lands reverted to county ownership. The state and federal governments bought lands, nurseries were built, and millions of trees were replanted on private, county, state, and federal lands. Although the influences of this previous era are still evident today, thanks to the sweat and toil of countless individuals, our forests have returned. Just as the first Europeans and Native Americans viewed forests differently, today's citizens value forests in ways different from their ancestors. Forests are important today for their aesthetic beauty, cultural value, ecological services, economic benefits, and recreational opportunities. All of these are basic to supporting a quality of life in Wisconsin. The reasons that forests are important to you may be different than your neighbor. You may value forests for the peaceful walks you take in the forest on weekends. Selling trees for lumber or hunting may be more important to your neighbor. How one values forests can be affected by a variety of reasons, including the health, wealth, religion, ecological knowledge, or personal experience of the individual.
Forests provide a range of benefits that accrue to the people of the state of Wisconsin. We put them in three basic categories: ecological, economic, and social. Ecologically, our forests clean our air and clean our water. They protect our soils and they provide a habitat for an array of plant and animal species. Economically, our forests provide an important component of Wisconsin's economy. The forest products industry is a $20 billion industry in the state, and forest-based recreation adds another $5 billion to the economy, making them collectively one of the largest sectors of Wisconsin's economy. More importantly, however, is the fact that we all use forest products each and every day in many, many ways. The houses we live in, the desks that we ride on, the paper that we use, and the list goes on and on. And our forest products are a renewable resource, which is really important from an environmental standpoint. Socially, our forests provide the setting in which we work, in which we live, in which we play. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to live in the state of Wisconsin if it didn't have its trees.
And those trees are what bring many tourists to Wisconsin.
Tourism is Wisconsin's third largest industry and brings $12 billion into the state's economy annually. Wisconsin's always been a tourism state, and one of the reasons that's so is because we have so many opportunities for outdoor recreation. And many of those opportunities depend directly on having so many forested acres in this state. We need to take care of those acres. We need to pay attention to them for the future of tourism and how tourism affects the economy in this state.
As they did historically, today forests continue to shape the economic, social, and cultural composition of local communities. Forest products and forest recreation and tourism are the basis of many local economies. Demand for each continues to grow. Worldwide, the human population continues to grow at a rate of 1.1% per year. Demand for forest products, however, is growing at a faster rate than the population. World demand continues to grow at a rate of 1.7% per year. As the emerging middle class in developing nations like China and India demand more wood products, this rate could increase. This growth in world demand will affect Wisconsin's forests and forest-dependent communities. Our worldwide economic system is based on resources, both natural and human. Wisconsin's forests are a part of this system. From raw materials to finished goods, forest products are originating from all corners of the globe. Multinational companies are operating where profit potentials are greatest. Now that our forests have rebounded from the cutover days, ensuring the continual delivery of goods, ecological services, and social benefits is the next challenge. Although a relatively new term, the need for sustainable forestry must have been what Teddy Roosevelt was alluding to. What is sustainable forestry? Who is responsible for managing our forests? What factors affect management decisions? These questions and more will be answered in the next segment.